feminize, harmonize, lead you to decolonize. Pardon, I'm about to cry. My neighborhood is gentrified. Poetry is potency. Open mics, you notice me. Sometimes I will go to 4 or 5 of them just in a week. 4 a.m. we go to sleep. Feel the spirit in the creek.
Estonko Hisje La Jadoga Muskoki Hokadoga Me Anathba Huitla. Greetings and welcome, relatives. My name is Roger Kuhn. I am Muskoki Porch Creek and I come from the Wind Clan. Some folks call me Dr. Roger Kuhn, though all my friends just call me Raj. So please feel free to be with me in community this morning, this afternoon, this evening, whenever and wherever you may be watching us today. I am coming to you all today from Homo territory in beautiful Sonoma County, California, which is about an hour and a half north of the San Francisco Bay Area. It is my pleasure to be hosting a panel discussion for the 15th annual Bay Area American Indian Two-Spirit Powwow. Can you believe it? 15 years we have had the pleasure of being in community and being in powwow with everybody. And I've been doing these panels for, this is my 6th time hosting one of these powwows for the Powwow Week. So this time around, I have such a pleasure of an esteemed group of panelists here today. The topic that we will be discussing today is Voices of Solidarity, Two-Spirit Community in Action. And I'm just going to let you all go ahead and quickly introduce yourselves, and I'm going to start this time with Bobby.
Hey everyone, Imaynayam Sutaika Bobby, Kashkanidak Mikari Warmi. I'm happy to be here today. Thank you for hosting, Raj. It's my pleasure to share, this space virtually with Two-Spirit fam. And I'm excited to chat with y'all today a little bit about my art and experiences. And yes, I'll pass it.
Excellent. Jovanny.
I'm sorry, can I go last? My roommate's making coffee.
Well, no, of course, please. Yes, go ahead.
You go. Hello everyone. Yaat Souksavanh Keovorabouth Yenishe, Keovorabouth Nishle, Nuts Uzi Bashashin, Ashe Dashache, Nuts Uzi Dashanella. My name is Dr. Souksavanh Keovorabouth or Souksavanh. I use she, her pronouns. I am an assistant professor at Northern Arizona University. And I am in the Women and Gender Studies program and Applied Indigenous Studies. I'm originally from the Navajo Nation in Deneta, the Four Corners. From a town called Chinle. So if there's any relatives out there, hi. But I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona, went away for college, and now I'm back, which is really awesome to kind of have a full circle moment. And Phoenix is the homelands of the Acoma O'odham and Peeposh peoples. And I'm happy to be here, and thank you so much, Raj, for inviting me. And I'm really happy to be in this space with everyone else.
You are so welcome. I'm so thankful that you were able to join us this morning. All right, is your roommate done with the coffee now?
Yes, just perfectly on time right there. Hello, everyone. I'm Jovanny Perez. I'm calling from Kumeyaay lands, also known as San Diego County. My ancestors come from El Valle del Cauca in what we call present-day Colombia. They are the Quimbaya people. I'm happy to be here representing them as a descendant. I am the co-executive director and co-founder of the Queer Soul Collective, an indigenous queer-led nonprofit activating emergence within the Two-Spirit LGBTQ community all across California and across this country, slowly branching out into other states as well. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here with you all. And I really look forward to just sharing space with you, sharing ideas, and just sharing the love for our community that we have for each other that has brought us here today. So thank you so much.
You are so welcome, and thank you for being here. I've had the pleasure to attend one of the Queer Soul gatherings. So if you all are out there and want to know more about that, I will make sure to put the link for the Queer Soul so you can. And y'all just had a gathering. What was it, like a week ago or 2 weeks ago or something like that? How did that go?
I was beautiful. I mean, it was the most well attended, and much like you, I was just landing, like I'm just kind of landing back. But it was so needed. so much good medicine that the community bought for each other, and just really special and magical, and honestly, a very humbling experience to be in the presence of so many beautiful artists, storytellers, medicine keepers, elders, etc. Just very lucky to be doing this work.
Wonderful. I think Queer Soul is such a great example of this idea of voices in solidarity. And I think what you all have created is just phenomenal. So I'm going to start you all off, panelists, with a question. How do you personally define community as a two-spirit person, and why does it matter so deeply to your survival, your creativity, and your activism? And either one of y'all, any one of y'all can just go ahead and jump in. Yes.
I'll go, just because you kind of got me in the Queer Soul mindset. There's this thing I say at the end of every retreat when we're closing circle, and me and my co-founder are usually the last ones to speak, and I love to say this because it really wraps up this sentiment of what community is. I tell everyone how much I love every single person there, not because we get along, not because we had a good moment, not because I think they're really smart or really kind. I simply love them because their life, their creation, they're an extension of this earth. And if you're here in the circle, it means our values are aligned. And we're not always going to get along, and that's okay. And sure, we may have fun times or we may not, but it doesn't matter because we're in community together. Our values are aligned. We're here for a common purpose. And that purpose is liberation and the freedom to be and exist in our full essence and accept each other, despite what our personal interpersonal relationship is. We are here together in community, and we're showing up for each other in community. And to me, I think like that to me is just like the core essence. It's like, I love you. We don't always have to agree. We don't always have to, be like, Kiki Cookie Crunch. But, we have a common goal, and that goal is to see each other and respect each other, and to be an example for everyone else to understand that, hey, I love you just because you're you, and you love me just because I'm me. And let's just do this thing because we both believe in the same. We both are on the same side. We're trying to do the same thing. So let's be in solidarity. Let's be in community with each other, and let's do it in this really good way, in this really loving way and respectful way.
Yeah, what you're saying reminds me of my favorite quote, which comes from an Aboriginal activist, Leela Watson, who says that if you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because you believe that your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together, right? And I think that is true. Like, we can have a difference of maybe the way we go about something. Maybe one of us is an activist. Maybe one of us is a scholar. Maybe one of us is a community organizer. Maybe one of us is a therapist. But our shared collective goal is that of liberation for two-spirit, indigenous, queer, LGBTQ plus people, and for indigenous communities broadly. And then beyond that, right, we want the totality of a liberation for all people around the globe, however they may identify. So Bobby or Souksavanh, any of y'all want to jump in here?
I can jump in. I think for me, as I'm building and trying to establish this research center, and for folks who don't know, I'm as a professor, a lot of my time is allocated for research, and I am inspired by the work that people do in this space, but also like in our communities and our hometowns, etc., who are doing this work already. And I'm building one of the first ever Indigenous queer, trans, and two-spirit research centers in the world, which is quite exciting. And I think within that, there's a lot of like, it doesn't feel like starting from scratch, but it also does. It's really an interesting process. But I think at the university that I teach at specifically, there's not really a person, and I'm sure other people can resonate, like there probably isn't that Indigenous trans professor that you had, like it's pretty rare. And I feel like I'm one of that first professor for a lot of students, a lot of grad students to kind of see themselves in these spaces. And I think that helps define not only community, but I think something I've noticed too is like people are fixed in the nitty-gritty of like LGBTQ or queer or trans or two-spirit, right? I'm trying to build this to help people understand the complexities that it's not really easy to fit ourselves in a box that a colonial system made up, right?
That's
That
right.
we are able to, and this is how I envision my community too, that like we are able to be fluid in a lot of ways of our gender, sex, and sexuality. And that's what I teach, right? I teach that and understand that in our communities and pulling from Dene, which is where I'm from, we don't believe that there was a binary. We believe that our word for two-spirit, our navle, which is our word, means a balance of both masculine and feminine. And so like how do we begin to understand that as a spectrum rather than a combining of this thing, right? And so I'm trying to help folks understand that. And I think that is a colonial trap to try to have everything defined in a very intentional way, right? Because then what happens when we understand the complexities and we can't fit that definition anymore, right? And so I think it's really interesting for us to, in my community, to be open, to talk about things, to have these types of conversations to challenge each other, but in a respectful way. I always tell my students this is a discussion, not a debate. And so how do we begin to be good relatives in that way? And how do we care for each other and ask each other like or imagine the world together, right? And how do we envision futures? And I think that's a very powerful thing because I teach this in my classes too. And sorry, I keep going back to my classes. I'm so wrapped up in academia, but um, when we know how the system is operating, settler colonialism, one of the first mechanisms is to control a body, one, and then two, and the easy way of doing that is through gender, sex, and sexuality. And so if you can have people define themselves based on that, it's easier for the other things to flow, right? What it means to be a citizen, what does it mean to be of here, right, etc. And I also want to note, like, community, I think is far vasting, not just in your little area, right? I feel like we're building a community now, we're not in the same spots. And I really try to advocate as well for urban indigenous peoples because I think that we're oftentimes not in the conversation, which I think is really important because also my research, about 75% of us live in urban areas, and we know that rate is a little higher for queer and trans people and two-spirit peoples moving to urban areas because of belonging and placemaking and all of that stuff, right? And I think it's critical that I for me, I'm intentional that like my community is urban. Doesn't mean that I don't have my res community, right? Or not trying to build this dichotomy either, but like I really care for our peoples who are in urban areas because I feel like we're the ones that in some cases aren't seen as indigenous or not seen as um understanding our culture, and I want to really break that barrier. It's like we can be urban, we can be city girlies, we can be all these different things and still be indigenous, right? But I think community is so vast in a lot of ways, and I'm trying to really build my own community here and build my new community and family, and I think it's over and extending in other places, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think that, what you're saying is so critical. You made that comment of you may be one of the first times a student has had a professor that has an identity like yours. And I think through my whole academic experience, I also have a PhD that I had one Indigenous professor the entire time of my entire academic studies, and I also studied American Indian Studies, and so within American Indian Studies there was one professor who identified as American Indian, and I thought that was so interesting. So when I eventually went on to become a professor myself, to be in a department like San Francisco State University, which was full of other Indigenous scholars, it was such a sense of a different kind of community. Now, Bobby, one of the things I was thinking about with you with this question is, as an artist, you have crafted a community, right? Like, y'all, I saw Bobby perform last spring, And, it was a great event. But when Bobby got on stage, I mean, I don't know where everybody came from because suddenly that stage was swarmed. And just to be in the audience, watching Bobby and seeing I mean, I don't think it was just youth, but like a lot of youthful folks in the crowd, but also, folks my age. I'm a yelder, not quite a youth, no longer a youth, not quite an elder at the elder stage at this point in my life. But it was just so exciting. And I thought, like, wow, you have fostered a sense of community. And so I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to that, like how your art and your activism has fostered the sense of community for Two-Spirit people and as a Two-Spirit person.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I guess I have to start off with saying, I came out as Two-Spirit about 6, 7 years ago. And the way I came out was very interesting. Is I came out basically writing poetry about my identity and then presenting it at poetry slams and local open mics in my area. So I came out to the poetry community before I came out to my family or my friends. So I got to give a shout out to poetry as an art form because it allowed for me to like kind of, be myself. And then a year or so later, my family, they found my poetry videos on YouTube. And so I was outed to my family in a time where I really didn't want to. I was still kind of living in my truth, like in secrecy, kind of, because, my family wasn't very open-minded to this Two-Spirit or, they were transphobic growing up. So it kind of like delayed me coming out. And so after that happened, I moved away from home for like a year. I moved to Texas. First time living outside the Northeast. And, like I think that I found the Two-Spirit community actually online, like on TikTok and Instagram. That's where I kind of like, I think the first Two-Spirit person I saw on TikTok was named Geronimo Louis, and we're still connected online. And I think that, growing up, I would go to powwows in New York City. They have a lot of powwows every year throughout the year. I went from age 4 or 5 years old, as early as I can remember. But I never remember seeing like Two-Spirit representation at these powwows, right? So it's like interesting how last year when I went to the Two-Spirit powwow for the first time, like in February, and seeing all these dancers, like maybe hundreds of dancers, in the grand entry. And I'm like, wow, all these people are Two-Spirit. Okay, my community is big, because I do think that the Two-Spirit community is a little bit bigger, like on the West Coast. It feels like that. I haven't been able to find like my Two-Spirit community, I feel like in NYC and Lenape land. So I'm always thankful for like my community online, on TikTok and Instagram. And I feel like, it's inspired me to keep writing. And like, I think as soon as I came out as Two-Spirit, it's like everything started flowing. Like I would go to shows, I would perform songs that I write, but I never went to the studio and recorded it. So I would say like a year or so after I came out as Two-Spirit, I went to the studio like 4 or 5 times in 1 year. I dropped 4 EPs, It was like a weight has been lifted from me. And in my first song, like on my first EP, that's where I kind of came out as Two-Spirit to like, I guess through my music. So like, I think that like music and poetry for me is how I kind of came out to start loving myself in my true self, because I didn't feel like I had a supportive community. I didn't feel like the LGBTQ plus community was my community. So, I think there's like a certain understanding, like when I meet another Two-Spirit person, it's just like, yeah, we're sacred, like, and they can't take this identity away from us. So that's what I've tried to like represent in my art and my poetry. So yeah, I would say, that the two most important things to help me was my own art and poetry. And I've noticed that when I do go to shows, I meet a lot of two-spirit people. It's like my art form has allowed me to connect with my two-spirit community in all these different cities. Like last year, I got to do a tour and I did 28 shows. It was so exhausting. But you know what? One of my favorite things to do is after shows, kick it with the local two spirit folks in Chicago, in New Mexico, in California. You know, like I've gotten to meet two spirit folks all over these lands. And it's amazing to me that like I did it just by being myself and being myself in my poetry and music. So yeah.
Well, Bobby, I appreciate so much what you do. There was a time when I was starting out as a musician myself, and it felt so lonely, I think was the word that I felt at the time, because um, there wasn't two-spirit representation in the queer world at that time. Or if it was, it certainly wasn't in music. So to be able to see what you have done and the way in which you are using your voice right now, I find so incredibly inspiring. And I hope that you will continue to do what you do for as long as it serves you. Right? And please keep going and please keep sharing. And I think that, there's a way in which when we move through the world, whether it is as artists, whether it is as community organizers, whether it is as scholars, we do so in a way that I think functions as a form of resistance. And I'm wondering if you all can just speak to how your work, your personal work, your professional work, however you want to define that, how does it serve as a form of resistance for two-spirit people? And right now, I think is an incredible example of the necessity of resistance.
Well, I think art and storytelling, whether it's music, spoken word, however it manifests, that's a direct representation of our soul's expression, right? And what are they trying to oppress? What is the resistance, right? You're trying to, and to be two-spirit is to understand that we have a different kind of frequency. We have a different kind of energetics, and it manifests itself through our soul's expression. And so when we talk about that art that's coming out of us, that storytelling that's coming out of us, that memory that we want to honor and venerate, that is what they are trying to suppress. So in essence, any and all art we create is a resistance to that, is the work that we're trying to do. And so we're trying to create these safe spaces so that that expression can come out, so that that frequency can express itself, that divine frequency that we were gifted with, that we had it's an honor and a privilege to carry, right? And so when we let ourselves express truly like what is coming out of our soul, just that act alone, that is resistance work. That is activism. That is why it's so scary to just let us be, to just let us express, because our expression is the direct opposition. And we don't express it in order to oppose. It just opposes no matter what, because the system is trying to control it, like the good doctor said earlier, right? It's about, how do you control a body through gender and sexuality and who you're allowed to have sex with and all of that. So just in that alone, but in everything else that follows, anything that we want to express freely, how we want to exist in the world is a threat to that oppression and that system. So everything that we do when it comes to art is a way in which we resist, even as something as simple as a poem, or the way we dress, or the words we say, or who we love, etc., etc.
Or the way that when we come together, that frequency I think then gets even there's a sense of like when you're within a space with other two spirit people, whether it's like at the powwow or at one of the gatherings that happen, or even just kicking it, right there is a different frequency that I know that I feel. And maybe it's safety. Maybe there's a way in which my frequency feels like it can be I can be more in it because I'm also feeling the frequency of other two-spirited indigenous group people when we're all together in spaces like that. So I so appreciate that idea, and I hope that's what we're creating today is like a frequency that people can feel, outside of their screens and can feel it wherever they may be watching this. Y'all want to jump in here?
I can jump in. I think for me, as we think about the world that we're in right now, and I think there's multiple parts for myself. Obviously, my own personal, like the world's happening, etc. But also like folks in the institution in higher education, like there is so much harm and also so much underlying stuff happening. And as a professor, like as students, you don't really see that unless it's announced, right? As professors, as academics on the other side, in these meetings, you kind of see the shit show happening behind the scenes. And you're like, holy fuck, like what is happening? And so I think for me, something I've always said to myself, my students, and people, and one of my my chair for my dissertation, she was like, "This is very Danae of you to like to 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 move like this, right?" And it was actually really humbling and actually really nice to hear that from a person. But I think one, being queer, trans, and two-spirit has really helped me and also saved my life, in a lot of ways of navigating, of being, etc. But also, as I said, like I think truth is always going to come through. There's so much that like lies, like a colonial lie, can maneuver, right? And so if you're being truthful and you're being honest and kind and all those things, and it's of course easy just to say that, right? But sometimes it's not easy to do it, right? And I think it's also sometimes can come off cheesy to say be kind and be a good relative, but honestly, what does that mean for us as peoples, right? And I think when we do that work and we be honest and truthful and kind and good relatives, etc., it comes back around, right? In a lot of ways. And I think there are people and other academics that I've seen through my trajectory who have pushed back. I've had a pretendian as a chair, which I don't subscribe to that notion, but they caused a lot of violence toward me in terms of stalling a lot of my work and telling me I have to take another year of my PhD, and I didn't get funding, so I had to find my own funding. So I'm like, wait, what? And so
Jeez.
like that's a part of the violence, the institutional violence that higher ed has on us and our students. And so I'm really trying to break those barriers and try to envision a world where like you don't have to go through, like students don't have to endure that same violence I endured to be successful, right? I don't want my queer and trans relatives to endure the violence that I have endured in my transition process, in my understanding my gender, sex, and sexualities. And so that I think that's why I'm so open and vocal about the truth of gender, sex, and sexuality, that it's such a spectrum. And like, I think that caring about it is really important because as we know, the federal government and the institution of the United States, settler colonialism, is really trying to manage bodies, right, at this time. And as I said, it's not a coincidence that gender is the first thing that they go for because that's the easiest thing to control into bodies, like right into prescribe people into and follow along. It's easy. And I think that's why there's this conversation and rhetoric. And I think it's easy because it's complex, right? It's complex to understand like ourselves as people and navigating the world and settler colonialism. When you don't feel that, you don't feel a sense of belonging. But I honestly say like that's the ultimate form of belonging is if you discover who you are, right?
Right,
And I
right.
think that that belonging is what hinders people and upholding transphobia and upholding homophobia, etc., because it helps them feel belonged in this
Mm,
area, in this
mm.
place, etc. And I think as Jovanny is saying, like that unknowingness is scary. And I think that's the part of transness too, right? Transness and two-spiritness that it is scary, but I think there's truth in it and I think there's beauty in it. And I think people begin to see that like, oh, we don't have to live in this conformed settler colonial notion of the world. And I always critique and always try to make sure that as Indigenous peoples too, we should question, and I think that it's okay to question. I don't think it's disrespectful. Understandings of what is tradition and what isn't, right? I think there's a whole history of our peoples who have been impacted by settler colonialism and violence, such as boarding school, right? Boarding school was meant to make boys boys and girls girls um and to teach religion and all of that. So think about 500 years of survival and a lot of the adapting to survive. And sometimes, unfortunately, in our communities, we have relatives who uphold that settler colonial notion and pass it off as tradition. And I really say this from the heart because I think it's important. I've been told that I'm disrespectful when I push back, but I think that it's not disrespectful. I think it's actually nation building work, right? As we as people, as Indigenous peoples, we owe each other that responsibility and respect to challenge what settler colonialism has ingrained into us and to be there in a kind way of course, but I think we really must challenge that. And I see that within our relatives. And I think that is the resistance too of sharing what Two Spirit is, what Indigenous queer trans and Two Spirit is, to our relatives as well who are back at home who may tend to be transphobic or homophobic and understand like if we think back about Dene, and of course we can probably think about our own cultures in this space, we didn't think like that. I like to envision and think about Indigenous in my community as people who were creating worlds that weren't limited by what we now know as the world, right?
Yeah.
And I always tell people like we actually can live in an unlimited world, but we're limited by settler colonialism in a lot of ways in our thinking, in our being, in our maneuvering, etc. But we can actually envision and create a very beautiful world outside of here. And they've done it in shows, so why can't we do it in
Right.
real life, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, I want to just name that I believe that educators such as yourself are on the front lines of resistance. And I do not think that gets enough credit. And you don't have to be a PhD educator or you don't have to be a college level educator. I'm talking about like community-based educators. These folks are like spreading the word of truth and they are fighting against settler colonialism. They are on the forefronts of like the decolonization movement from my perspective, whether that's educating folks about land, whether that's educating folks about traditional knowledge. I think there's a way that sometimes folks look at Indigenous academics as somehow like falling into the system. It's like, no, we are on the front lines of the system. Like it is so hard to be an Indigenous scholar. It is so incredibly difficult and challenging. So thank you for just naming like what folks oftentimes don't see behind the scenes is how difficult it is to navigate that colonial system and that structure that wants to keep you in a very particular box, right? And that idea of like when we're fighting against these settler colonial ideas of gender, it's their version of gender. It's not our version of gender. It's the version of gender that they're pushing up against, that we're pushing up against. And then when we get in these academic settings, it's almost like the institution wants us to behave, and they want us to show up in our identity, in our brownness, but they don't want us to show up in our fullness. And it's so difficult to navigate that. So I just appreciate the resistance that you are doing as an educator. So thank you. In solidarity,
Well,
thank you for
well,
that.
thank you. I really loved what you said. I didn't, and I hate to just like insert myself, but I just also want to just give that advice and shout out. Like, thanks, Raj, for that because it's really important. And I think something that is impactful, and I want to share this with my, like, of course, Indigenous relatives who are in higher ed, is that as you move through that ladder and move through higher ed and move forward, um, there is a false promise of what it means to have a seat at the table. And so I want you to be critical and mindful of what that means, because I think sometimes we lose ourselves in these spaces, and I want you to remember who you are, where you come from, etc. Because just because you have that seat at the table, just because you get that higher income, doesn't mean that you're doing that work. And sometimes you are, but sometimes we can lose ourselves because that institution, I tell you, I seen it firsthand, it changes people. And I think that we have to understand that and really resist and push back. And I think one of those ways of resisting is being yourself and
Mm.
setting that boundary. And I've noticed from like literally last semester, this job is a job. It changes, and that people like I'm looking at it as a job now. Like obviously care about my students and my research, but
Sure.
the institution sees me as a job, and they can replace me. Actually, they're not replacing lines, by the way. Replace me in any way, right? And so I say that in a way to remember who you are and remember that these teachings and challenge the system, because I think it's always going to try to push things onto you to change and be like, we have a brown person, we have an indigenous person, we have a trans person. And so we're okay, but remember to always think about your community and us in these spaces.
Yeah, because otherwise our visibility becomes a box that they're checking, right? Bobby, I'm going to bring you into this next question because I think this kind of moves right into this next question around, often visibility is often framed as progress, but it can also bring risk. So I'm wondering, how do you navigate visibility as a two-spirit person, especially as someone that has gained notoriety? And what makes visibility feel safer to you and or more dangerous?
That's a good question. So, I guess visibility, for me, it's like, I don't see much of my two-spirit community here in the Northeast, like how I mentioned before. So a lot of what I see is online, right? I'm like tuning into online, who's doing what, right? And so I do notice that one common thing that I can relate to about certain people who identify as two-spirit online that might have, a large platform is that, we get a lot of hate. Honestly, like I'll wake up to my phone sometimes and I'll see hundreds of hate comments, right? And this hate, it comes from a place like of colonialism, of violence, some people say misunderstanding. It could be all these things, right? So when I see visibility for two-spirit people, it makes me happy. But also we have to recognize that there is a lot of this negativity towards our community, right? And so I'm always sending love to two-spirit people, making sure we're taking care of ourselves, because sometimes this negativity can get to certain people. I haven't allowed for it to get to me. I limit my time on social media per day, usually like 5 minutes or less, just to like make sure I'm not reading all these comments, because in the past I have, and I've gotten dedicated into it, and so like I think the more visibility we get, the less negativity I feel like we'll receive. Is that true? I don't know. You
Mm.
know,
Mhm.
we know that two spirit is an identity that was created for our community because we felt unseen in the LGBTQ plus community. So my heater's on right now. It's kind of making a little noise, but
I don't hear you on my
yeah.
end. You're good.
Okay, cool. So yeah, like visibility for me is important, especially seeing artists, like other artists who are identify as two spirit, whether you're a curator, whether you're a writer, professor, to me, I look at all these things as artists. So um the more visibility I see, the safer I feel.
Mm.
And like I would say recently I felt nervous at some shows that I go to because it's like sometimes I'm the only two-spirit person in the whole lineup, right? But it will just take one two-spirit person in the crowd or in the audience, or maybe they're working the stage crew, one person to make me feel safe. So the visibility is very important to me, um, no matter how many people it is, whether it's just making a connection with one person in real life, walking the streets of NYC and I meet another indigenous two-spirit person and they're like, hey, I know you. Like, so I think we definitely need a lot more visibility because I think there's a lot of people out there that they don't even know what two spirit means. Like it's still not understood in the indigenous community. Like I think we're pretty like people know what that is, but like I think outside the indigenous community, like we have a lot more representation to like you know and visibility that we need. So yeah, I think that pretty much answers the question.
Yeah, to continue to foster that visibility, and then the roles that each of you are playing in your respective communities, right? To really bring greater visibility, whether it is bringing folks together like Queer Soul, or whether it's standing up in front of a classroom or standing on stage. These are all ways that I think visibility and representation matters, right? I mean that's a big part of that. This summer, Bates had an opportunity to perform at San Francisco Pride. So several of us had, like a 20-minute set at Pride this year, I was so thrilled to be able to do that. And in the very center of the stage, sorry, in the audience, I guess I'm standing on stage, and there was a two-spirit person, just like right in the middle. Like I could tell how excited they were that this had never happened before. San Francisco Pride had never done this before. They'd never given two-spirit people that platform before. And that to me was like the most amazing moment as an artist, to be able to look out and to see like someone's face reflecting back to me. And I knew how much it meant to them to see folks like myself, to see themselves represented in the artists on stage. It to me is like even right now, I'm really feeling like emotional just thinking about how powerful that moment was for me as an artist. And then just remembering like their smile. And I was doing this little had this little like rainbow, I don't know what you call it, like little thing that was like floaty thing, and I was able to throw it to this person in the audience after my set, and it was just like a really really cool moment. So I want to shift our conversation a little bit to thinking about solidarity and collective care. And so I just want to ask y'all, like, when it comes to this idea, I'm going to pop these into the chat field in case you want to look at these questions. But what does real solidarity look like to you? And this can be from other two-spirit folks, from Indigenous communities, and from non-Indigenous allies, because I think that's also really, really important. And then what doesn't feel supportive, even when it's well-intended? Like what comes to me oftentimes is like the tokenization of things. And I'm a part of a community of folks who work in sexuality and sexual health from a psychology perspective and from an educator's perspective. And when I started my career in that group, the moment they discovered that, oh, I'm a two-spirit person and I'm an Indigenous person, I feel like that has just been this label that's been following me. And I have to fight with the fact that like I'm a therapist. I have the same degree that you do. I have the same license that you do. Let me do the therapy piece. It always has to be this sort of like, so it's like this well-intentioned, like invite you to the table. I think Souksavanh was talking about like this. They invite you to the table, but then they want you to play a specific role at that table. So they're still trying to keep you corralled. And the moment you try to like express an opinion outside of their definition of who you are, what you want to be, as well as intention as it is, it does feel oppressive to me, and it does feel like this sense. So solidarity, I think, for, even in just like what that I'm thinking about it, is that like we can just show up as people who happen to also have a shared identity. So I'd love to just hear what y'all's thoughts are about that.
I can chime in. I think for me, I've really sat with this one for, of course, beyond this too, before this, because I think it's really important for us to think this through of what allyship means. What does it mean to be good relatives? I keep going to that because I think it's key for all of us in a lot of ways. And I think it's an ongoing practice that we should be doing, right? Um, I think what real solidarity looks like is for Indigenous peoples, non-Indigenous peoples, etc. Everyone, I think it's everyone has an obligation to understand the violence of settler colonialism. I think that is a key thing. I think that people have to not just be like, oh, I'm going to listen to this trans person, but understand what does it mean to envision a world outside of binaries, right? That's your job. That's your job as an ally, as a person who wants to care for peoples, to decolonize your mind to thinking about what the limitations of this world is, right? And I think that it sounds like simple, but it sometimes isn't, right? I've often had conversations with people about like the complexities of sexuality, right? And talking about what does it mean when trans women hook up with straight men and they automatically assume that this person is a certain way, right? And I think it's important to understand like that is the complexities, and I'm not defending anyone's sexuality, but I'm saying that like right, we have to envision a world of care and think about how we live outside of binaries. And I think sometimes in those, when we talk about two-spiritness and transness, you still see people in that binary, right? You still see someone as what they were assigned at birth, etc. But it's like, how do you understand that the world outside of that? And I and I do say this in a very serious tone. It's your responsibility as a relative, as an ally to do that work, not our job to teach you that, right? And I think that is very important. And I think, of course, listen, right? I think that's important. But I think that goes to the question, what doesn't feel like support? Because there's so much listening can do, right? You have to act on that listening. You can't just be like, oh, I listened to this two-spirit person, or I listened to this Indigenous trans scholar talk, and it was really cool. Well, what are you gonna do about it, right? Like you have to do something to make it actionable, to care for us. Are you going to go protest? Are you going to donate funds to people? Like, what are you going to do? And I think that's something that I am very mindful of, because it's like we know we have relatives out there who are dying. We know we have relatives out there who are being taken by ICE. We know we have relatives out there that are literally being beaten, etc. All of these things, and you're just gonna listen? What? I think I'm at a state where I'm like, I'm frustrated by that. Like I need more, and we need more, and we deserve more as peoples to deconstruct, reimagine the world that we live in and the violence that Indigenous, queer, trans, and two-spirit people envision. And I hate always repeating that we are oftentimes the highest rate of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, right? Indigenous, queer, trans, and two-spirit people. And I think I'm just tired of restating that and people being like, oh, we'll listen. No, do something about it, Do something about it. And I think I just want to I'll end there, but I think that's kind of where my solidarity is. Put it into action in any way that you can.
Appreciate that. I will add one thing. It is not our responsibility to educate folks, though if they want us to, pay us. I'll just say that, like, pay us for our time and our talent and the years that we have spent in understanding and creating and all of these things. So just a little shout out, because folks oftentimes want us just to show up and educate them. It's like, yeah, well then pay me for my time and my, what I'm valid here. Bobby or Jovanny? Yeah, go ahead, Jovanny.
I think there's something that we don't talk enough about when we talk about solidarity, and it's doing your personal work. You cannot show up and be in solidarity without really, really doing the work within yourself. that you've been indoctrinated into, that we've been programmed to. Unless we dismantle the systems in the ways we behave and the ways they show up, how can we hope to show up for others to help dismantle bigger, larger systems? It starts with us. The solidarity work starts with each and every one of us. And it's the hard part. It's probably the hardest part. Because once you do that, once you're able to, you know, for lack of a better word, just wipe all that shit off of us that was placed on us, then we are really grounded. We know who we are, we know what we're about, and we know how to show up. But until we do that, we can't possibly, you know. And so that's what happens a lot when we talk about, you know, how our allies show up in solidarity. I can tell immediately when someone hasn't been doing their inner work, immediately, because it turns into virtual signaling. It turns into, you could see in the way we take up space, you know, how do I show up? You know, when I can see if someone's been doing their work to dismantle these systems within themselves, in how they show up and how they take up space and how they allow others to take up space or not take up space. And I think that's a bigger part of solidarity work, right? Is allowing others to take up space and knowing when to not take up space. And that's a big one for me, because I had to really learn, you know, you know, mask presenting, I show up into a space and people go, that's a cis man. And I've learned that that is a privilege. And I've learned that that privilege has given me blind spots in how I take up space. So now when I'm in a space and I want to show up in solidarity, one of the things I do is not take up the space that I've normally been given the privilege to take up. And so something as simple as that is how I can show up in solidarity. But I'm not aware of that until I do my work and I illuminate those blind spots. And so I think it's really important to say that if you're going to show up in solidarity, if you want to do this work, it starts with you. You need to do the work on yourself before you go and like rage against the machine at something you're not even realizing. You're perpetuating the very systems that we're trying to dismantle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that even this idea of how our bodies are sometimes perceived by others and the unintended privilege that comes with that is something just to kind of be aware of. You know, even like, you know, Souksavanh, you and I, like having like doctor in front of our names, right? Like this perceived ideology that people then impose upon us because they think, oh, well, y'all are like, you know, these PhDs, right? It's sort of like, yeah, I mean, for most of them, like, you know, like that doesn't mean shit to me. I mean, it gets me in certain doors, but the door, you know, it's because my ancestors didn't have that opportunity to have that education, right? Or like when, you know, to be like presenting in a certain way, like the way our bodies look or the way that people perceive our bodies, I think is so interesting because then how do we use those privileges that we have, whether it's our bodies, whether it's our indigeneity, whether it's our education, to really be in solidarity for folks, that it's not just my own individual action, it's the action for others that I think is so important. Going back to Leela Watson, right? Like work together. We have to work together in that liberatory framework and that ideology. I am so aware that we are almost like, we've like blown through like our whole time already. I cannot believe how quickly these things go. But I have just a few more questions, and Bobby, I want to bring you in on this one, and you know, y'all feel free to jump in here too. Though, you know, I'm wondering, like, when you imagine a world that is truly safer for two-spirit people, what do you think changes first? Is it our laws? Is it our culture, our family systems, our spiritual spaces or practices, or do you think it's something else entirely?
Well, you know, I think when I see people who are in leadership roles, you know, that are two spirit, like it makes me inspired for the future. So like our representation has a lot to go, you know, it has a lot of work to do because of sometimes how smaller I feel like our community is. So like when I go to certain shows and I'm like, oh, like the show that we did together, you know, seeing you and you hosting the show and seeing, you know, Dr. Eric curate the show, you
Mhm.
know, like that was one of my favorite shows of last year because of the fact that two of the people organizing the show were Two Spirit, you know. So I think, you know, I'm in the artist world, so like I'm not in politics, right? But I'm like Two Spirit for president, like what's up, you know,
Well, art
like
is also political, Bobby, right? I mean, art is
right.
political. Yeah. Yeah.
No, for sure. So like, you know, maybe like I'm not a big believer in like supporting politicians because I feel like a lot of them are bought out in this country and
Most of
they
them.
don't have our best interests. So like, yeah, like maybe Two Spirit for mayor, Two Spirit for governor, you know, like obviously we have to do groundwork in our community, like, you know, helping our community out because sometimes that doesn't trickle down to like the houseless Two Spirit people or like, you know, the indigenous queer people who are struggling, you know. So I think leadership roles in our community, like at every level, whether that's you're curating your local open mics or poetry shows, whether you're curating, you know, whether you're curating events at your university, teaching classes, right? Whether you're organizing on the committee for the Two Spirit Powwow, like you are, you know. So like, it comes in leadership roles, I think, because when I see people who are Two Spirit and leaders, it gives me hope and it makes me feel safe. So like, I think that's what we need in order to, you know, make our representation better for the future. We need leadership roles, Two
Hmm.
Spirit people, like because a lot of our communities back in, you know, before 1492, the Two Spirit people were leading ceremonies. They were, you know, you know, maybe they were the head of the spiritual like welfare of the community, you know, maybe they were the people who were the expert in medicine, you know, and in plants. They knew the most about plants, you know. So like, I think that's what we need to see: leadership in all different types of roles in our communities.
Yeah. I appreciate that. So we are just kind of coming to the close of our time together today. I just want to thank you. Well, I have one more question to ask you, but before I do, I just really want to thank each and every one of you for your time and your offering your wisdom that you shared today. And as we noted at the top of our time together, we are in incredibly challenging times. Um, there is a lot of uncertainty in the world, and that can certainly bring a challenge to people's sense of safety. So I want to name that. And I also strongly believe that hope is a guiding beacon in my own life. And I want to know from each of you, if you're willing to share, what gives you hope right now? And what do you want other Two Spirit people listening to know about their power, their worth, and their place in the world?
Can I take just I just need 10 seconds. I'll be right back.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. Time and space give people hope. That's important. Do either of you want to jump in, Bobby or Souksavanh? What gives you hope right now? And it's also fair to say, like, I don't know. That is a perfectly acceptable answer.
I think I got an answer.
Yeah.
You know, since I came out as Two Spirit, I noticed so many of these water protectors and land protectors at the forefronts of these movements. Like, for example, Line 3.
Mhm.
You know, for example, the climate march that I went to in September, or even last week when I was performing in front of the New Mexico State Capitol. There's Two Spirit people like at the forefront of these movements, leading the movements. And you know, these might be people who, yeah, they're called the F slur on the street, but they're leading hundreds of people in a protest. They're leading hundreds of people in a rally, you know, and doing the things that so many of our ancestors did, protecting the land, protecting the water. So that's what gives me hope. Seeing two-spirit youth, elders, all different ages at these type of events, speaking their truth, being their true self, and making the two-spirit nation look very warrior like, because sometimes they think, oh, we're soft, like we're gentle. It's like, no, a lot of us are warriors.
That's right.
And that's what gives me hope.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bobby.
I'll jump onto that as well. I think, of course, seeing, and I think like that in those positions, I just want to echo what Bobby's saying. I also, for myself, what gives me hope on top of that is like the ability to kiki with each other and talk about what we're going through. And I think that is a part of what the system, what it feels like now is that we can't do that, right? We can't, it doesn't feel right or it doesn't feel good to be able to laugh with each other in some moments, or but we know that as indigenous peoples it's like that's kind of how we like survived, is like through laughter and all of that and making jokes about things. And I think with indigenous, queer, trans and two-spirit peoples, queer and trans people of color, etc., I feel like, and I was just reminded of this yesterday or the day before, that when we're building that, it's important and critical to know that we're humans too, and we want love, we want laughter, we want to be safe, etc. And I think that is what is giving me hope, is that I feel really comfortable with the community that I've built, to have those kiki moments, to be reaching out to other people and not just, and as Raj said, like even though doctor is in front of my name, I've been in spaces in the institution where I've been asked if I'm a staff member, or asked if like I am a student, etc. And so I'm really intentional about that in that space, but I want to invite people to like, I'm a human too, and like I have kikis, I have stories, I have all these different things and laughter that I love to share with people, and advice, all of that. And so I think that's what is giving me hope, and realize that people out there, people in this moment, I think it's intentional to feel the overwhelmingness, but to know that in order to survive, we need each other, and we need that laughter, and we need that sense of belonging. And I'm going to try to encourage people to always tell people in your lives that you love them and share those moments with them at any possible time, right? It is a very scary time. So I think share everything you can now, but even outside of these times, share those moments, because I think that's what makes life beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. Jovanny, how about you? What's giving you hope right now?
I think what gives me the most hope is the knowing of where we come from, the legacy that we carry as two-spirit people, that we have always been and we will always be. And not just be, we've been important. We are important. We're integral to the fabric of life, to the fabric of this existence, of this reality. I know that. I know it in my cells. I know it in my heart. I know it in my mind. That fuels my hope, that fuels my motivation. And I know that at some point, through our organized effort, that everyone will come to understand and accept this once again, because it has been in the past. They will understand that we are a bridge between these binaries that extend beyond the binaries. And all you have to do is, look outside, look to nature, and understand that nature thrives because queerness thrives in nature, and we are nature. And I know this, and we need to educate people on this. And once people see this, they begin to understand. And once I see those light bulbs goes up and those eyes widen, and this kind of like queer cacophony of understanding start to create this like new acceptance, then then I light up and I go, yes, yes, you're getting it. You're starting to understand. And that gives me so much hope. That really like fills me up. So the hope is the knowing. We know, all of us, everyone on this panel, everyone that identifies in this way, we know without knowing, we know without words. And that is what gives me the most hope.
Well, here's to knowing, right? Here's to knowing. Here's to feeling. Here's to all of that. Thank you, each and every one of you, for just being here today. Thank you, everybody that is at home or on the move, listening or watching this. I want to thank the Bates Powwow Committee for inviting me to once again host a panel as part of the Bates Powwow Week. If you are interested in learning more about the Bay Area American Indian Two-Spirits, please visit our website at www.bates.org. You can still make donations to our powwow or any of our upcoming programming events. And for those of you that are out there, please be safe, take care of yourself and one another, and always remember that two-spirit community is love. My name is Dr. Roger Kuhn. In Muskoki, we say Mado, which means thank you. Chadam Jachajachlis. I will see you later.